Today, we're going to talk about hyperautomation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and really how those can drive your automation strategy and your digital transformation strategy overall. So, what we're going to look at really is kind of what's happened over the past few years, where automation is today, what the impact of hyperautomation can be on your overall business and your opportunities for automation. And then we're going to talk about the future of it and really where artificial intelligence and machine learning start to drive a lot of benefits with it. And we'll get that. All right. So, what are we going to talk about today? What we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, automation, hyperautomation, and digital transformation. What is the relationship between those? Do a little bit of definition around it, kind of how we at Precisely see automation, and just want to make you aware of some of the things really to consider as you start to automate some of those core business processes that you've got. We're going to talk about an automation platform, and I'm going to talk about it at a fairly high level. But as you think about it, really what we're looking at is how can something like the Precisely Automate platform drive or sit at the core of your automation and hyperautomation strategy. We've got some success stories. So what are companies seeing in terms of just the benefits and gains they've had around automating these processes? Then we're going to look at where does artificial intelligence fit into this? What does that future look like for automation? And how do we see it short term and long term? And what are some of the things you can consider about it? We'll look at some key takeaways, and I'll talk briefly about Precisely, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. So automation, hyperautomation, and digital transformation. It's really interesting because it's the perception of automation and the role that it plays in our businesses and in digital transformation has really changed over the past 3 years, ironically. Because when the pandemic hit, I think the one thing we all learned was what were the limitations of our digital transformation efforts up until now. In many, many cases, we had been very, very focused on the data and very, very focused on digitizing and digitalizing and really getting to that point where we could understand our businesses based on the amount of data that we had and based on the correct data that we had. Unfortunately, when you have a disruptive event, being able to adjust your business processes is actually more important to maintaining continuity in your business. So in 2020, we discovered those limitations that we had. And coming out of the pandemic, as we talked to customers, and we've been automating primarily SAP processes for 20 years. So we've been doing this for a very long time. And coming out of the pandemic, what we found was the needs that companies haven't really changed, but the context that they look at them has. This need for agility, it previously really all revolved or primarily revolved around competitive advantage. How do I use agility in my business to get to market faster than my competitor or adjust more quickly? Well, in a normal market, that's great. But what we have now is this need for agility in our businesses to be able to respond extremely quickly to disruptive events. I mean, the pandemic was a massive disruptive event, but what we saw was it wasn't just an event, it was a series of ongoing and subsequent events. So we just want to make sure that we can be agile going forward. And automation is a really great way to have your business positioned in a way that and structured in a way that you can adjust very, very quickly to these changes. We always want to be able to go faster. And the amount of data that we're collecting, the pace of business is constantly accelerating. And there was a great quote from Justin Trudeau from a number of years ago where he said, the pace of change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again. And I don't recommend people think about it too hard because that will make your head hurt. But that pace of change is something that we are constantly having to adapt and adjust to. Automation is a really great way to be able to allow our current teams and our current business structure to grow and evolve and adapt as we go forward to that just acceleration in our business process. And then ultimately, we want to be able to improve the quality and integrity of our most important data. And for us and for what we're going to talk about from an automated processes standpoint, that really sits around those back-end business processes that surround master data and the need for master data to be absolutely correct and be available and have all those things that are going to help really drive our business as we go forward. And HFS, which is an analyst firm out of the UK, said it a few years ago. They said, technology is a means to an end, but data is the currency of digital transformation. And while this may be true, I would argue that it is incomplete because we can't just look at data alone. And I think we've learned this over the past few years. We have to look at the processes that are creating and managing that data. These two things are interdependent. You can't do a process improvement initiative without looking at the data that that process creates and manages. Because if you do, you run the risk of a process that creates bad data by improving it and making it more efficient. Suddenly now you're creating bad data very, very quickly. And what that does is it increases your business risk, and it really is counterproductive. Same thing on the data quality side. If you're looking at doing a data quality initiative without looking at the processes that you're using to create and manage that data, you're just going to be doing data quality initiatives literally till the end of time. So these are two things that you have to absolutely take into consideration. And as we look at automation and look at the way that a properly structured automation strategy should work for you, these two things should always be taken into consideration. It's not just the process, it's not just the data, it is these two things work together. And then this is where hyperautomation starts to come in, and it becomes more important because hyperautomation is this idea of being able to expand automation across your organization as quickly as possible and as broadly as possible. And I talk to a lot of people. I give a version of this presentation a lot. And talking to people, one of the things we found out early on is ask them about hyperautomation, and you can get a dozen different definitions of it. So for the sake of this presentation, and as we talk through and look at hyperautomation, we're going to use the Gartner definition. They coined the phrase a number of years ago, and it's just a good way of looking at it from a common standpoint. And their definition is hyperautomation is a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, and automate as many business and IT processes as possible. Basically, it's how do you find those processes, figure out what are the right ones, and then automate them across your business as quickly as you can. The key, though, is not just the idea of hyperautomation, but it's the second part of this. It involves the orchestrated use of multiple technologies, tools, and platforms. You can't go buy a hyperautomation. You can't, there's no place you can walk into and go, I'd like 3 hyperautomations, give me a side of data governance, and maybe a little bit of data quality for dessert. It just doesn't work that way. You need to be able to take a portfolio approach that says, what are going to be the best tools that we can use on a case-by-case basis? And we've got a customer who talked about this a number of years ago, or just several years ago. This is one of the largest spirits distillers in the world. And they said, we have Blue Prism and Precisely Automate, and we choose the best tool on a case-by-case basis. So this, in a nutshell, is that idea of a portfolio approach. What are the tools we have available? What are the processes we've looked at? And what are the tools that are going to be right at any particular time? So now we've talked a little bit about kind of how we see automation and how you need to make sure you're looking at process and data as being interchangeable at the same time. We've talked about what is that definition of hyperautomation and getting automation across your organization. And what we believe very firmly is that an automation platform sitting at the core of your hyperautomation strategy is going to be the best way to go. It's going to be the way that's going to drive more success across your organization than just looking at a set of ad hoc random tools. So why an automation platform? Well, a good automation platform, and I will tell you the Automate platform does this, will give you options, and it'll give you a number of different ways to look at automation. So in our world, automation falls into these two categories. It's data automation and it's process automation. Data automation, we focus on SAP processes, but if you think of data automation, it really applies to any of your big systems of record. But it's the ability to automate mass data processes. And most of these mass data processes, we just know from experience, companies tend to manage in Excel. Excel is everybody's favorite tool, and it's every CIO and CTO and CFO's worst nightmare. But there are ways to govern Excel processes. And on the data automation side, with a good data automation tool like our Studio product or Studio Manager, you can govern those Excel processes. And when we talk about these mass data processes, these are ones that don't require a workflow. There are things like condition changes and pricing changes and master data updates when you need to do like a whole change of, it could be sales territory, something like that. So mass data processes can drive a massive amount of efficiency, and we'll talk about that when we get to the customer case studies. Process automation then is for processes that require workflow. And in our world, that comes in two flavors. It's Excel workflow and it's Foreman workflow. Excel workflow takes those data automation Excel files and moves them through a complex workflow. Best example we see of this is something like journal entries in finance, where you have multiple people who need to see them. Your accountants are already working in Excel, and in many cases, you're processing your invoices and other journal entries that you need to, and GL account activities are already in Excel. But they need to, depending on what contingencies are, be reviewed by various people. So it could be the value of a journal entry, and you need, depending on the value, different people see it, or company code, or region, or currency, or any number of things. So being able to manage that through a complex workflow and at the end have it automatically post, in our case to SAP, can drive a lot of benefits to it. Plus it's completely governed and you can attach that Excel file at the end. Foreman workflow is for those complex data intensive processes that often require multiple constituents across your organization to be engaged in that workflow. So what you'll see is a simple, basic information gets entered into a form, and then that information goes to multiple constituents who need to either review information or add information to it. And this is role-based forms. So let's use a vendor create, for example, which can involve, it usually starts in procurement, but it involves your finance team and your master data team and your materials team, and often your logistics and warehousing team and any number of other groups across the organization. So procurement will start that process. They'll add a little bit of data, and then the system will take it and split it up. And so finance will just see a form that asks them either to add information that is relevant for them or review the information that's relevant to them. Same for your master data team, same for your materials team, so forth. Once all that information is gathered and collected, it all gets recompiled for a final approval. And that approval, once it's received, goes immediately into SAP or is posted to SAP. So your new vendor account is created in SAP automatically. And throughout that process, you're able to validate your data, you're able to check that data, confirm that it is correct. So you know that your data quality is as high as possible for that new account that's created. Recently, what we've been able to add is the ability for outside participants to contribute to that workflow as well. So now if you've got a new vendor, they can add in some of their core information, EIN numbers for tax, contact information, emails, all that kind of stuff. And that kicks off the workflow as well. So they're contributing to it, and that can save you steps in terms of somebody having to transcribe an email or copy and paste and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to all of this capability that a platform gives you. And so if you think about what it does from a hyperautomation standpoint, it gives you the flexibility and the ability to really automate a significant number of processes across your organization. So we talked about workflow. You can use connectivity with APIs because many of these processes aren't just single system of record. There's multiple different technologies and multiple different systems and multiple different databases that you need to have data contributed from or be able to contribute data back to. Self-service, we talked about. Data management on that data automation side, we talked about. Cloud deployment, as our IT organizations get more streamlined, you're looking for the ability to deploy and leverage cloud as a way to both drive and simplify your IT organizations, but also drive efficiencies into governance. I talked about process governance a little bit, but process governance is as important as data governance. So automation and a good automation platform will give you that process governance and auditability that you need. What has happened when? Low-code development. This is probably one of the most important parts for hyperautomation and a hyperautomation strategy. So with hyperautomation, one of the core things and one of the core drivers to it is what is known as citizen developers. So these are people in your business that are close to your process and close to the data who are able to actually develop and deploy automation solutions across your business. And a good example of this, we have one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world who is one of our customers. And they've got a core automate team of about 25 people in their IT organization. And that team, while doing automation themselves, also supports a team of about 100 citizen developers across the globe. So they're really exemplifying that idea of hyperautomation and being able to get automation across as much of the organization as possible. Excuse me. And then you've got attended and unattended automation and being able to do those too. Because if you think about it, there's unattended automation. Something happens here, a set of software steps happen, and your data ends up where you want it to end up. Nobody ever touches it. But a lot of these complex data intensive processes, as we saw with that form and workflow example, are human in the loop. They are attended automation. And a lot of tools, traditional automation tools, don't like human in the loop processes because we are human. We're finicky. We're unpredictable. We're not set up for automation in many ways. So being able to automate efficiently those human in the loop processes can drive a lot of benefits to you. We talked about form, and I mentioned why data quality can go up so significantly when you've got checks throughout. And ultimately, when you think about hyperautomation, it's about empowering those business teams to make an impact. You think about that citizen development and you think about the ability to expand very, very quickly because your automation is being developed and deployed through the team of people who are by far the closest to the data and the closest to that process. So they're able to do it very quickly and very efficiently. And some examples of this, we've got customers as an energy drinks company that was able to effectively cut their time to market for new products in half. They cut it between 50 and 75% just by going from a heavily manual process to a form-based streamlined process where everything's centralized and it moves very quickly. The 90% reduction in the cost to process material changes. This is a data automation case where to do it manually and this was materials in SAP, they figured it was going to take per 100 materials was going to take about 60 hours and cost about $4,000. So they were going to have to hire staff. They were going to have to do a lot of things and train people. By finding that data automation side of things through our studio product, they were able to save about $500,000 in the first year. And that's for one single simple process. It was one change within a material record, but it cascaded down throughout many different parts of the business. So automation can drive a lot of benefits. The 97% reduction in the time to create a customer. This company went from 144 hours to 6. They went from 3 weeks to less than a day. They've got 1.25 million customers. So they've got lots of customers that they're trying to manage at the same time. 87% reduction in the time needed to qualify vendors and materials. This company went from 2.5 years to 3 months. So their customer conversation changed fundamentally. And then 20,000 journal entries is a great example of Excel workflow. So these are all different companies using, excuse me, different capabilities of the Automate platform. They could all be the exact same company, though. And this is what hyperautomation does for you. This ability to think about all of the different processes across your company and apply or leverage an automation platform to be able to automate all of them as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of benefits you can get by having that core technology sitting in the middle of your hyperautomation strategy. And then there's other things that we know customers use. Will often use either independently, as we saw with that customer example earlier, or they'll use it in conjunction with the Automate platform, things like RPA bots or other automated systems. So that's what we really want you to think about. When you think about automation, you think about hyperautomation, is we often right now think about automation as that singular thing. It is a process, but we want you to be able to think about it. And you want to be able to think about it by making an impact across your business. So that's where we are with automation today. But what happens when you add artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence came along and hyperautomation was the cool thing. And then earlier this spring, every IT director went, ooh, what's that cool new thing? Well, if you look at the tools for digital transformation, artificial intelligence has kind of become the one that's most important. But we have to think about what artificial intelligence is. There's really different flavors of it. There's generative AI and there's predictive AI. Generative AI is the one that's been trained on these very large models that is designed to create content. Predictive AI is the one we see being much more sort of immediately applicable to automation, where it is able to predict an outcome based on a little bit of information and based on your historical information in the algorithm you've got. So we'll again use material creation as an example. In SAP, there are hundreds of fields in a material record, and it tends to be highly manual and highly complex. And so being able to automate this process is going to drive a lot of benefits. Today, we use business rules to be able to put some guardrails around it. That's not necessarily highly efficient. Business rules are difficult to develop. They require SMEs. They often, require the gaining of cross-functional alignment. So you've got different business priorities. Artificial intelligence can really eliminate the need for a lot of this business rule development. Because now what you're able to do is you're able to, just add a little bit of information, and your algorithm, which has been trained on both your historical information and your ongoing use of this process, is going to take a form and it's going to fill it out more completely for you. So what it becomes is it becomes less a data entry exercise and much more of a data review exercise. And one of the things that we've seen and we've done in our proofs of concept up to now is if you think about confidence levels in terms of what it's going to give you back for fields, in our case, we often look at sort of green, and I know I'm getting these numbers wrong, but green is like 95 to 100% confidence. Blue is 80 to 94% confident in anything that's either color-coded red or not color-coded at all. It has below 80% confidence. So you're able to go in and you're able to very quickly look and understand what does it think is right. So I can now do a data review exercise. If it's blue, I need to spend a little more time with it. Let's confirm that is correct, or let's update it if we need to. And if it's either blank or red, we just need to make sure that we're updating that information. And as we do that, we're training the model and our confidence levels get tighter and tighter and tighter. So your confidence level can often go from being, 95 to 100% to being 98 to 100% and is green. And your blue level goes then to being 95 to 98%. So there's a lot of strength you can get out of automating these processes and adding that process or adding that artificial intelligence into it. And in many ways, it's kind of a traditional machine learning model that has a lot more intelligence built in. And what does this do for you? Well, it really improves your decision-making through the recommendations that it's able to give you. In a lot of cases, it's able to make recommendations about form fills that you may not have thought of, or that may have taken you much more time to figure out what is that supposed to be. We're talking about improved data quality through those AI checks. There's checks going on of that data in the background. And again, it's using historical data and it's using the data that as you go through the process is being updated constantly. It creates rules and predictions that really aren't possible without it. It's almost impossible to hard code lots and lots of rules. And a good example of this is we've got customers who literally have taken for a complex process over a year to just develop the business rules. Actually, developing the automation technology doesn't take very long. Maybe a month, maybe a couple of months to build out the automation, but then the business rules are going to take you another year to do. So being able to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to that process based on your historical information means that you can reduce your time to value very, very quickly, because based on a small set of rules, you can start doing, and your historical data and a trained model, you can start very quickly with the automating the process. And then, as I said, as you use that process, the machine learning, the algorithm gets better and better and better and better and better. Your confidence levels get higher and your data quality is going to continue to increase. But you're not waiting a year and a half or a year or however long because you're trying to create new business. So what do I want you to take away from all this? Because this has been amazingly fast, and I do apologize if I've been talking very but automation as we see it today and as we see artificial intelligence being applied to it does give you that agility. It gives you the agility that we've always wanted to get in terms of competitive advantage, but it also gives you the agility for dealing in a disruptive environment. It gives you the speed, as you saw from some of these people, a 90% reduction in time and cost to be able to process materials. An amazingly simple problem with an amazingly complex solution, except when you automate it, and then it simplifies that all over again. We talked about where you're able to improve your data quality through stewardship and checks throughout. Process visibility, being able to see what's happening throughout a process so it's auditable, but also so that you know if you've got a bottleneck or if you've got a problem and identify it. Business team focus with that citizen developer, automation flexibility, looking at the different ways you're going to automate a problem. Scalability. We've worked, and we do work with many of the largest companies. That good example that I gave you of ExxonMobil and how they're using a core team to support their citizen developers. Again, massive company. And then we always recommend you look for a proven track record. Obviously, we've done this for 20 years. We will tell you, and we know we have a proven track record. We've got thousands of customers around the world. There's a lot of companies coming in. The previous speaker talked about how many sort of AI tools are coming out, but there's a lot of companies coming into the automation space these days. And they have interesting technology, but what they don't have is that experience working with the processes and the systems they need to. So that, in a nutshell, really is kind of how we want you to think about automation, hyperautomation, and artificial intelligence. Now, for many of you, especially if you're in the SAP world, you're probably sitting here going, I don't know who Precisely is. Well, if you know Precisely, or if you know Windshuttle, and there's a good chance you do if you're in the SAP space, we've been automating these SAP processes for, like I said, 20 years. In 2021, we were acquired by Precisely, which makes us part of the leader in data integrity. So we give you the accurate, consistent, and contextualized data you need to make those confident business decisions. And as Precisely, we do this for around 12,000 customers worldwide in over 100 countries. We're in 99 of the Fortune 100, and on any given day, we've got about 2,500 employees. Now, many of the leading brands in the world trust us with their data, and hopefully after you've seen this, you'll be curious about how we can help you with yours. And we also have partnerships with many of the leading technology providers. So we have a vast ability to help you across your entire IT and data spectrum. I've just talked about the automation part of it, but we really have phenomenal solutions for you across that entire data integrity spectrum. And definitely, if you want to learn more, go to precisely.com. There you can find white papers, demos, lots more information. Or if you've got an immediate problem, please feel free to give us a call. So with that, hopefully we have a couple of minutes for one or two questions.
That's great, Andrew. A great walkthrough on hyperautomation. Yeah, I think we've got time for maybe one or two questions.
Go for it.
We've got some questions in from the audience already, so I'll just kick off. How have companies overcome the organizational complexity challenges to actually achieve automation success?
So the biggest one that we see, and as I mentioned, these are very complex processes when you're dealing with lots of different people across your company. It's being able to establish that your set of objectives. What do we want to accomplish with this automation? And so when you think about something like, and I mentioned the vendor create, everybody in that value chain is looking to simplify and streamline that in some way, but we all may measure it a little bit differently. So it's coming to those common objectives that we've all got, and then being able to manage that through the process. And I think this is one of those areas where artificial intelligence is actually going to help, because it's going to start building those business rules for you, and you're not going to have to get agreement from 20 different people across your organization. It may be just a small team with those initial rules.
That's great. Might just be able to squeeze one more in.
Go for it.
Can you give some examples of use cases, or maybe one example where APIs contribute to an automated process?
So we've got a number of companies using them. We've got recently introduced a set of REST APIs. The one that we talk a lot about with companies is something like Salesforce, where you're using Salesforce to initiate or create a customer record. But the reality of it is you need that customer record also to live in SAP. So you may start or create the customer record in Salesforce, and then through an API call will then kick off a workflow in SAP that also creates that customer record in SAP. And what it does is it gives you common master data across both. So you're able to really sync that and make sure that you've got the highest data quality possible across those complex processes.
That's great. So I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A, just coming up to time and at risk of overrunning. Thank you again for the excellent walkthrough on hyperautomation. It's great to have you here again.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. We'll now be moving to our next session. So for our next session, I'm proud to introduce Tony Weber, who will be talking about leveraging data-driven insights for seamless digital adoption using a case study from Nationwide. For this session, we're joined by Tony Weber, the technology adoption lead and product owner for digital workplace experience at Nationwide Insurance, who's sharing her case study. Please keep the questions coming in from the speaker and we'll answer as many as possible. And Tony, it's a pleasure to have you join us today. The floor is yours. Just 2 seconds.